I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out. And I don't think they're going to do it. I think a lot of them are dead. I think a lot of the hostages are dead. I think it's a great human tragedy.
President Trump with a dire warning to Hamas after Hamas said it would delay the release of 3 hostages slated for this Saturday, claiming that Israel violated the ceasefire agreement by blocking relief supplies and targeting civilians. Israel's defense minister calling the move a blatant violation, warning its military is on high alert while Israel decides next steps. The president also reaffirming his commitment to rebuilding Gaza while speaking with Fox's Brett Baer.
It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing. But I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt. I just think it will be stabilized if the United States owns the Gaza Strip. If people aren't living in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas isn't there because nobody's there, people aren't there, nobody's going to be there, and later on it can be developed.
Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for being here.
Delighted to be here, Maria.
Before we get into Israel and Hamas and whether or not these talks are stalled, which seems to be, what is your reaction to President Trump saying that the U.S. will rebuild and own Gaza?
Well, I think it's a novel idea. I mean, the reality is, for almost 50 years, we have had solutions that don't materialize because they're not realistic. You know, one is the two-state solution for the Palestinians, but what's really happening is the Gazans, who are Palestinians, have been supporting Hamas, and what they've been trying to establish is a one-state solution. The destruction of Israel, supported by Hezbollah as well. So it hasn't made any sense. There's been no progress. And it's pretty frustrating to watch the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who clearly, when the war began, could have taken in particularly the Gazans, Palestinians, inside of Gaza, knowing there would be casualties because Hamas was husbanding them and not letting them get out. If they had put the pressure on them, they could have set up camps and saved so many of those lives. What President Trump is talking about is clearly something permanent because, as we've all seen the videos, the demolition of Gaza is real, and it would likely take years for it to rebuild. So it's a different idea, certainly, but it's worth discussing. Look, nothing else has worked for almost 50 years. And it's worth taking a look at something else.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the two-state solution there because it hasn't worked so far, and you make the right point that they're talking about really, in reality, a one-state solution. Look, these talks for Phase 2 were supposed to begin last week. They are supposed to be setting up terms for Phase 2. I spoke with the president of Israel on Sunday, and he was not happy about the state of the hostages. Watch this.
We went through another ordeal, enormous pain and joy. 3 of our sons came back after being almost a year and 3 months in captivity, solely in tunnels, in terrible situations. I'll give you a picture. This is Eli Sharabi. Eli Sharabi's wife and daughters were murdered and butchered on October 7th. Eli Sharabi's brother was murdered and butchered by Hamas in Gaza after being taken hostage from the same kibbutz Be'eri. You can see Eli before and Eli after. And this is exactly the situation. They came back emaciated, and what we hear from them are horror stories, which only exemplify why we must do the deal. And I want to thank President Trump for being such a strong force in bringing the deal and making it happen.
General, what a terrible shame to look at the pictures of these hostages. They look completely different, like different people, after more than a year in captivity. President Trump made a threat. He said the hostages better be out by noon on Saturday or all hell will break loose. What do you think that means?
Well, I think he's obviously putting pressure on Hamas here. I mean, the so-called violations that they're talking about are really not significant and shouldn't be hold up the hostage release. I think the president is also frustrated with the agreement that was made that dribbles out the hostages 2, 3, 4 at a time over a 42-day period as opposed to releasing them all at once. But he is leaving this up to Israel. He's expressed his personal view, get them out by Saturday, but it's also Israel's call as to what to do about it. And that's appropriate.
So what are you expecting out of Europe now, General? Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth arrived in Europe for meetings with NATO allies and Ukrainian defense leaders. He's expected to press for increased defense spending from our allies while calling for a diplomatic end to the war on Ukraine. At the same time, we're expecting President Trump to come out with tariffs, economic tariffs against Europe. This week, he's talking about a reciprocal tariff, potentially adding a VAT tax to it as well. I guess he'll use that as leverage. What are the goals, do you think, with these meetings in Europe?
Well, I think a couple things. Certainly, there's a NATO ministerial meeting with the Secretary of Defense will participate in. And I just got back from Europe myself this last weekend. And I can tell you that the NATO members clearly are willing to go beyond the 2% in terms of a percentage of GDP dedicated to defense. They're somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5, 3.7, which would be a significant improvement. President Trump would like to get that up to about 5%. However, the United States contribution is 2.9%. So that would have to be an increase for us as well. But nonetheless, they recognize what has happened here. You know, Russia has obviously invaded Ukraine, and they clearly have goals beyond Ukraine. And that has been classified information for some time, but the Germans released it publicly, and others have done as well. There's no doubt where Putin's head is on this. It's Ukraine first and Eastern Europe second. So the NATO and the European members understand that, and that is why they're certainly willing to contribute more. And let's face it, President Trump is assisting them in that thought process, let's put it frankly.
General, are you comfortable with the numbers that you're hearing in terms of defense spending? You know that President Trump wants to increase defense spending and put it in the reconciliation package up to $125 billion. You were the first to really take note many years ago on this program about the fact that we are outmanned, outgunned when it comes to China and the Navy. And that's something that I asked Pete Hegseth about on Sunday, particularly talking about new efforts to modernize with President Trump's idea to get an Iron Dome in America. How do you feel about what you're hearing with regard to the investment that is set to go into the nation's defense?
Yeah, there's a recognition in the Trump administration that we've got to dig ourselves out of this hole that we have been in, where our defense has eroded over a number of years. President Trump started that recovery in his first administration. But President Biden's budgets have been somewhere around 3%, dealing with inflation. And so there hasn't been any substantial recovery of defense, and that is what is needed. The congressional commission I was on, in my own opinion, is that it needs to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5%. Chairman Wicker, Senate Armed Services Committee, and Chairman Rogers both want to move in that direction over a 2-year period. So I do think there's some consensus developing here, Maria, on increasing defense.
Good. I like that. And I like to hear that you're on board, because obviously nobody knows this better than you. General, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great talking to you, Maria. Have a wonderful week.
And to you, General Jack Keane.